watch out, this is a long one.
That's the 6th pass, and the first of the low-speed taxis, and the engine quit on him. He's stuck.
Cherokee County traffic, 2 Tank Deltas, low-speed taxi, runway 5, Cherokee taxi.
Hi.
And otherwise, just a bunch of hills and trees.
So this is the official Wasabi debrief video for our 3rd trip to Atlanta to look at the Raptor program.
Tried to have the conversation with Peter early on, and it just...
So after all the feedback we've been getting on the internet about all of our long technical briefs on these videos, we decided to continue that trend with the Raptor program. Specifically after our decision to abort on the Cherokee airport.
I'm not comfortable flying out of this airport.
Thank you to Peter for building an awesome airplane and inviting us out to check it out. Thank you to Butler Parachute for making the best parachute in the business. When do we get to the hot part of the day?
Yeah, I wish we were in the hot part of the day.
That's great.
I know a hell of a lot more about airplanes.
I'm positive that you do. That's not what we're talking about.
It's not feeling good.
Let's get to the top of the hill and take a break. Well, temp.
Cherokee traffic, Archer 57.
It's still in the airplane.
Sit here and watch oil temperature.
Getting smiley faces, that's a good sign. It's not on fire.
Cherokee traffic, Sky 12 Hotel, turning left.
So there are a lot of stories out there about this airplane. The thing about social media, I don't need to tell anybody, is just a little soundbite without a lot of context. This video is an effort to put all 500 gigs that I have of this airplane, cockpit video, briefings, debriefing, to put all that in one place so that you get the entire story, everything we know about it. At the same time, this is an hour long. So as we've run way long, there's obviously things that had to be cut out. Give us the feedback in the comments. I will not delete any comment which is valid feedback. The idea of this channel is to send and receive information so we can all be better at what we do. Hang on, it's a long ride.
Hey guys, Justin Gillen here, Wasabi Flight Test. So Wasabi has a background in professional research and development flight test experience. We identify and mitigate risk within a test program, and we design a plan that will expand the envelope of the aircraft while we explore the flight characteristics. Then we report those characteristics to the future operators of the aircraft. We have the ability to provide design, build, and test experience and knowledge from our backgrounds, bring the project from a black box of question marks to a defined vehicle. We aren't the test pilot who shows up to a polished hot rod, our scars waving in the breeze, and go flying. We want to help the project get over the hurdles.
An important thing to remember about a program like this is just how vast it is, right? So we can't possibly look at everything. In the case of this program, he's made hundreds, thousands of decisions that have all added up to the overall safety of the program. In a more formal test environment, a test pilot would have been along for the entire ride, but in this small types of programs, most of these guys can't afford to have a test pilot along for the whole ride, so we end up getting pulled in at the very last moment. And as a result, we're constantly playing catch up. How do we figure out what's actually going on with the program? So a lot of it is figuring out simple questions that we can ask with solid answers to get an idea of what it is that we can't ask about, right? One question leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. A lot of it's really just about interviewing the designer, builder, owner guy, right? And trying to get confidence in what you can't see based on what you can. Another thing to remember about this type of programs is typically the kind of guy that does this, the kind of guy that's willing to go out and forge into the darkness with a brand new idea that's going to change the world. These tend to be, number one, sort of headstrong people, right? But at the other hand, they tend to be people that have gotten used to trying to explain their ideas to all types of people. Especially if you're at a little tiny GA airport where there's not a lot of people like that around, you're constantly being bombarded with all the things that you're doing wrong that maybe are just you're doing different. So a lot of the early stages of the program are about building that rapport with the owner, right? If you come in and give a list of everything that's wrong with the program, you're not going to get invited back. So if you can start to build that relationship and not only help them understand where you're coming from and the technical expertise that we bring to the table, but also let them help you understand how they got to that compromise and all the background that goes into it. An important thing to remember with Peter, right, is he's all by himself in Georgia. So a lot of the headaches that he has come down to the fact that it's just one dude alone in a big hangar trying to figure out how to make the next solution.
The large majority of our test programs we don't actually get to talk about. We generally let the customer run the publicity program if there is one, and Raptor is no exception. So Peter had asked us to let him tell the story. So on the first trip we published very limited details. On the second trip we published nothing. But this time around Peter asked us to publish, so here we are.
4:30 in the morning. Justin's on his way. The sun has not risen yet. It's going to be awesome.
Let loose in the car. Sorry, my sandwich is rolling around back there.
I'm the only one laying in bed thinking about all the shit that's gonna come off that airplane.
I'm putting it on, but I don't remember like tightening it.
We just landed in Hutchinson County Airport here in Borger, Texas. It's about 6 hours from Rosamond.
So I first met Peter at Oshkosh 2017. So fast forward to June of 2019, Peter reconnected. We'd been chatting via phone and email. We met up at Oshkosh 2019 and had brought up concerns. I had some concerns about the single string ECU. He had done some static thrust measurements. Of course, he had the woes with his Redrive build, and then of course the Redrive had very low time moving into flight test. So we'd come up with a plan to put high power time on the Redrive to get ready for flight test. Also, from that initial look, I told Peter that the airport didn't look like the right place to do his first flight. So the emails and calls continued. This is again fall of 2019. But we eventually focused on engine problems and then aileron wind-up or play. So we came up with a plan on the phone using the CFRs as reference. But for now, we had only dealt with these problems over the phone, and the trends were already visible. So Peter had documented his continuing trial and error redesigns with the Redrive and the flight controls. They were all on the internet. So they were highly visible, but there were other things that weren't so visible. For example, the pressure test, failed below limit load. The broken windows are still on the airplane, and there are also several points where the design diverged from the build. I should say where the build diverged from the design. So, for example, the lifting surfaces are bigger than as analyzed. Of course, the aircraft is heavier than expected, and the flight control systems were never really designed. It was just a kind of a trial and error build process. The landing gear has some things as well. For example, there are low tolerance bolts where there should be tight clearance fits in the gear system. And not that any of these things are huge on an individual basis, but you can see that there's a trend that is generally not a confidence booster for us in the airplane. And I get it. Designing an airplane is hard. There's a lot of work. It's tough to do. The problem is, there's a resistance to do the changes that need to be done. So speaking of things that make a test pilot nervous, a big one is configuration. From analysis through subscale testing all the way to flight test, any changes in configuration means that the build over time is diverging from what was analyzed way back in the very beginning. And if the builder doesn't close the loop with the analysis on the end, then what you have flying doesn't necessarily match what was analyzed way back in the beginning. And the assumptions you made way back then may no longer apply to the final vehicle. So these changes in configuration also invalidate any testing that's been done along the way. So if your subscale model changes in configuration significantly to the full-scale model, then the subscale model is invalidated. Anyway, applied to Raptor, so think of all those redrive designs. Each time a change is made, it basically means a zero-time design. And we had a plan, like I said, to put power on it for a certain amount of time. That's hard to do with cooling issues, but it just didn't happen. So these diverges away from design, usually show up as hits to performance or effects to performance and handling qualities, stability control, and that's why that first 30 seconds after liftoff from the runway is really where all the question mark is. Just because how close to the analysis is the actual vehicle, and what can we expect when you get off the ground. So we'd also received numerous heads up emails, if you will, from various people, from you folks essentially, highlighting technical areas of concern. Most of them we had already had a beat on, but some we hadn't. So again, all of that is appreciated, and definitely whenever you see us doing stuff, if you know about turbos or twin turbos or weird things about airplane stuff, just let us know. It's freaking awesome. But again, the underlying all of that technical conversation is the fact that the airport and surrounding areas allow no room for error.
All right, so we just flew 980 miles.
980 miles? All right, now we're going.
Going from here.
Cherokee County, there it is. 990? That's like exactly how. Who did that?
Come on.
I have done this before.
Where are we?
Decatur.
Decatur. Oh wait, does that mean we didn't make it to Florida?
Nah, Elliot was flying and we went slow.
Oh, I can open that up if you need me.
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Woo!
So the first visit took place in December of 2019, right before Christmas, and the plan was to perform our full standard pre-flight inspection, and then we build from low speed taxi, through high speed into first flight and second flight. So we arrived, we spent a full day doing the inspection, and it was immediately clear that the ailerons, the windup was unacceptable. So with the stick held full to the left stop, for example, Elliot on the surface out there could push it all the way to the other stop, and with very little force. And because of that, it also meant that we couldn't generate any real forces in the aileron axis. But there's a lot to check on an airplane like this with that first inspection. So we used our usual format, going down the list with a roundup at the end of the day. We'd get together. We hadn't finished the inspection, but because the aileron system was so far out, Peter had elected to basically send us home rather than, the other option is we stick around, help you work through it so that we can turn over quicker. We left him with a list of 27 action items that need to be done before we got back, one of which was the reducing friction in the pitch axis, and we headed home. Trip number 2, that was June of 2020. So Corona's in full swing. We travel out to Canton to pick up where we left off. So we began by going over the action item list. Much of it was incomplete. That aside, the ailerons were still heavy, but the windup was pretty good. I think we actually ended up beating the 50%, of the direction to the other stop. And we were able to generate, forces in that lateral axis. So great improvement there. However, it became immediately clear that with as little as 5 pounds of force in the roll axis, so you're pushing right, and if you go to that 5 pounds of force in the roll axis added a whole bunch of friction to the pitch axis. And that's from the baseline of 30 pounds of breakout force.
The interesting thing about this moment was that we found that if you set just a couple pounds, so if you imagine taking a soda pop and putting a soda pop on the aileron, you would find that the breakout forces in the pitch axis would go up many times.
We did some low-speed taxiing, but in the same manner as the first trip, roundup at the end of the day, and we identified the cross-axis load increase as unacceptable, so Peter sent us home. Also, during that trip, we had the most extensive conversation about moving the aircraft to a better airport. We sent Peter recommendations for resources to move the aircraft for a pretty reasonable fee, but having evaluated the airport from the ground only, I had maintained my assumptions of using the freeway for any abort option.
Very quickly.
Definitely did that better, by the way. We're going to Canton, Georgia. Here we go.
So the trend we were seeing through this process, throughout this relationship building process, is a resistance to do the work that needs to be done to make the aircraft flyable. Meaning that in the sunshiny world where the power plant assembly is taken off the airplane and put on a test stand and run at power for 1,000 hours. The Redrive is bulletproof. Anything broken on the airplane has been fixed. The gear is attached in a 100% reasonably manner. The measured parameters from initial flight, initial taxi, high-speed taxi, all that measured parameters is fed back through the analysis, and it all agrees. So in the world where the airplane is as mathematically understood as it's possible prior to the flight, then the problem of the airport environment is not as big of a concern. It's much smaller variable in the equation. So over the 3 years of this program, the plan hasn't changed, even as the details resolve. So for the third trip, we would begin the same way. We'd show up, we'd inspect the rework and the resolution of the initial action item list. So from that, we would get into low-speed taxi, we'd confirm the initial acceleration, we'd perform initial response checks in 3 axes and evaluate ground handling. Then high-speed taxi, we'd continue to evaluate longitudinal stability, lateral directional stuff, and we get some good balanced field bit length numbers. And then that leads into the first flight.
Don't worry about some idiot upstairs.
No, I was laughing earlier because Peter was like, yeah, it's hot, slow down. And I was like, oh yeah, that's that southern thing where everyone's like, takes it really easy because it's so fucking hot. You wanna looking through our fixed items?
So this brings us to our third trip just last week. So Rona's flaring up all over the place. We flew back to Georgia via general aviation because of that, and that met with the unacceptable schedule for Peter. This time around, Peter had put in an effort to address the full list, so the action item list back from trip 1 was complete.
This one was worse. You can see it was starting to get some scoring in there. And these patches, it's interesting at how it has those patches on there. And then because the brake pads on the left side were overcompensating for the dragging brake on the right.
Sure.
And so you see this was the one that was the worst one of all, worn down the most, but it still had, a good 2.5 mils on it, and they say it's serviceable until that notch is gone away,
So you can see if you look up in there that. Thank you. Checking out the Aileron cable keeper security.
Huh. Yeah, this is better access here.
They go all the way through, right? They're like this long.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so the gear is just basically drilled through the 70-75 and the bolt goes through. So you've got...
so there's no bushing in the gear hole?
And so...
It's not a tight fit. It's not like a press fit.
Yeah, well those bolts are not even straight. They have a slight bend in them.
The bolt is bent, you mean?
Yeah, brand new, that's how they were.
Oh,
they just can't make them pull them
just
straight.
because they're so long,
Yeah. So what I did over there, and this one, when I had it up on the blocks there the other day, I was doing this. There's no play in this one, right?
No.
Any shimmy in there from when the tire was locked, this basically caused that amount of force. But that one didn't go like this as much as that one did.
Right.
So that one, what I did was I cranked on the bolt gear, rotated at 90 degrees.
I see. So you're just turning the whole thing.
Yeah. So if it does have a curve in it, and the curve was allowing the leg to go like this, now any play in it is in the other axis, so the other way. And then after I did that, I did this as well, and it was better. It was as good as this one.
Okay.
So as soon as I would, bring up full power, all the air would suck past it and create a false reading.
So they also make pitot booms that have static port on the boom itself, on the pitot tube.
This one does have one on it.
Have you used that one yet?
So, and I think that uses a separate hole in there to figure out. Yeah. Well, it's on a, there's a hole around the back.
This doesn't have static.
The other thing I don't know is see these alloys are Not the smoothest things in the world. You see, I had it off the ground. It's a weird scoring on these islands too.
So you say they're not the smoothest. You mean that you expect them to be polished?
Well, I just like right there. I like see these nicks.
On which
See there's like nicks in the edge here. That's like tooling, like right, something banged against it. Back here. These just haven't been loved. Either, yeah, something's happening. And then the other thing is this, like these are polished marks from the band, but like what's this one? Like what's that? There's nothing on here that. I think this is what he did this.
Nice to get that all.
Alright, well thanks for your help. Don't want to take any more time.
And that way it keeps it between these two here.
Oh, no
So it
problem.
kind of, I'm sure it's gonna move around, but.
Oh, I added that. Yeah, I added that one
Yeah, okay.
all along there.
Yeah, this is real nice.
Yeah, because I just that was the thing I did absolutely last.
This is water.
Yeah, that's a water.
Cool, man.
And that'll get to 200 degrees.
How's my back? Has it got soot all over here?
Oh, you're destroyed. You definitely have to throw that shirt out.
Oh man. For setting the static pitch.
Absolutely.
Well, what Martin had told me is like just set it to what you're comfortable with, because you won't be flying with that other than idling around.
Martin's the MT guy?
Yeah. When
Will it make full power rated RPM on the ground?
the prop
Yeah.
2400, and that's 3800 on the engine.
And that's your rated RPM. So it'll make full revs on the ground.
It's capable of doing that, but the way I've got the controller set right now, I've just got it off with the maximum setting. And for the first flight, I don't think there's any reason.
What do you have it set to right
I
now?
have it set to about 3400.
So 400 less on the motor, which is what's that make on the?
So just to summarize what happened in this next part of the conversation, what started as a question about Peter's changing of the fine pitch setting on the propeller spiraled into a discussion about the fine pitch setting of the propeller, the governor setting of the propeller, and how the governor is run because it's electrically controlled governor, unlike most governors. The engine peak power, because the engine is automotive, there aren't really good maps on where the peak power is. Because the engine is electronically controlled and therefore tuned by Peter, there's even more variability about where that peak power is. And then on top of that, there's always going to be questions, especially with a canard, about the amount of heat that you're putting into the system. So how are your radiators big enough? And therefore, should you run the engine at slightly less power in order to make sure that the radiators are big enough? When it comes to the fine propeller pitch stop, that all comes down to the loss of a governor. So you want the propeller to fail in this coarse of a pitch as possible to try to maximize the chances that you would have enough prop to fly in the event that the governor failed and the prop went fine pitch. When it comes to propeller governor, the operator could set the high RPM in the cockpit to be something less than full rated power. But the important thing for Justin and I was to make sure that the pilot had access to max power. When it comes to engine peak power, there's a couple different things going on here. So first off, there's the discussion of where is peak horsepower. The next question is where is peak thrust? And then there's also the difference between static thrust and dynamic thrust. So it's not uncommon, especially in like the STOL community, to just tie a load cell to the tail and run the engine up and say, oh, the airplane makes 700 pounds of thrust. That is a number. It's absolutely valuable. However, as airplanes go faster and faster and faster, the efficiency of the propeller becomes more and more of a player. And you find situations where an airplane that pulls good at 0 miles per hour doesn't necessarily pull good at 120 miles per hour. So this discussion of where is peak power, where is peak thrust, and then can we measure it, especially given the short constraints of the runway. Lastly is the engine tune discussion. There's been a lot of talk on this program about the engine control unit, that's a single string, that it's automotive based. Peter's been doing most of the tuning. So this was another chance to pick his brain and try to understand and get confidence in how he'd set it up and that he'd set it up in the right way.
Flat all the way until the governor kicks in. It sounds like you're getting lots of power out of it, but you lose that first part, unless you static run it up and with the brakes on. That first part of the roll in there, it's like it's just cavitating.
The shot you already were taking.
Appearances and stuff, they're really... that's the other thing about carbon. No, it only needs to be just over the tip there, yeah. You pull it up there the way you had it. Now try and open the door. No, just try and push it on the door.
Yeah, it's not open there.
It's not going, right? And you'd have to put a lot of effort in there to get that last bit, right? And if you want more bungee on there, you can tie a few knots in that loop and make it shorter.
Yeah,
You know, just make it tighter. It's up to you. You're looking for some shape. But you know, if you disconnect the spring,
Yeah, you'll be able to feel it better.
and you feel it. Now, do you feel that dead zone in there? Just
Right, yeah.
an elevator.
Hold it. Well, it's pretty small.
Yeah, it's just the tiniest little
Yeah.
bit. You know?
No,
and
that's
most
pretty
times it'll
good.
be loaded up anyway.
Well, I mean, that's like
Yeah.
some of
and
the. I've seen way worse than that. I
Try
guess.
the aileron. You feel any dead zone in that? Just left and right back a tiny bit.
Yeah, that's probably just some stretch in the
Yeah. Well,
tiny bit of stretch.
If you want to see, I've got
Is the aileron
cable.
moving?
You guys want to see my cable gauge thing?
Go.
Get that out. Show
Yeah.
that to you.
My goodness, it's a lot of work. What's loose?
Probably just using a bit of square stock. I actually have a C channel, I believe. Yeah.
I wonder if I know what we can do. We can take that.
More of a dent on there. You can still see the little, and that was when I had the maximum force on there. That's 68 pounds of force.
Pull back just a hair. Yeah, right there. Let me see if I can feel it with my finger.
It's nothing. It's,
Yeah, you can't even feel it with your finger. It's like a little.
If you want, I'll show you.
So much better. Yeah, show off your fancy new toy.
Oh yeah, look at that. I didn't see that one before. It's marked the paint on. Right there.
Show
You
me.
get in the seat, I'll point out.
Show me.
Left pedal, hold on. So we found an issue with the rudder stops in the underneath the console, right at the pilot's feet in the airplane. This was not caught on the previous two inspections, and it's a good example of how complex an airplane like this is, and how easy it is to forget things, especially when there's that sort of stop and start mentality that we had experienced on both the first and second visit. Long story short, there was push rods that went fore and aft underneath the panel associated with each of the pilot's feet, and then to transmit that motion from the right seat to the left seat, there was a bar that went laterally across the cockpit, and that bar would actually run into the rod ends, and those were actually the stops on either of the outboard rudder pedals. So the solution was we just put a block in front of the outboard pedal so that you couldn't quite get the rudder as far enough to make that impact. Same thing on this side.
So that is the stop.
It's identical, yeah.
So that's the stops we've been feeling the whole time.
Yep.
Copy.
And and I knew it was there like that. Again, it's just one of these things. Remember?
So the concern
This was my
is-
first rodeo.
Yeah, not talking shit about the airplane at all.
yeah.
So
No, I
the
want you to
concern
talk
is
shit about the
that
airplane.
the concern is that it's outside jam potential.
Put it on the squawk list. Think about it. And if I have to just freaking epoxy a block of wood behind there, I can do it.
Awesome.
We did the weight and balance with a couple configurations. First of all, we checked it with Justin in the airplane and the ballast. We did it without Justin in the airplane and just the ballast, and then we ran another alternative ballast configuration where we moved some ballast around, moving ballast further forward to get the empty weight of the airplane down. The reason this is so important is that it ties directly to static margin, right? So the further forward the CG is, the more likely the airplane is going to be stable, but the Raptor, like most airplanes, is a little bit tendency to be tail heavy. The Raptor also has a very high empty weight compared to what it was predicted to have. So as a result, there's not a lot of useful load available. So if you can say, move 50 pounds of ballast further forward and find 10 or 15 pounds, that's now ballast that you don't carry, so you can now carry more gas. The last piece of this equation is how much gas are we going to need for the first flight. sub thing that's just sort of a Wasabi thing is I personally don't trust fuel indicators, especially on newly built airplanes. So for me, I like to drain the tank empty and then see us put the gas back in, or fill the tank all the way up to the top where we know exactly how much gas is on board. So all these things are all part of this sort of discussion as we're doing the weight and balance on the airplane, sort of stretched out that part of the day.
Absolutely.
So the lights are 3 green when it's down, and I believe they're red when it's transitioning, and they're green when it's up.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, blue when
Blue,
it's up.
yeah, that's what I remember.
So, all right, when you guys ready?
We're rolling on everything. Yep. Okay, ready for extend?
Just adjust the bracket so it pulls. The question is, can I just push on it and make it sit there? Yeah, see, it's not going to take much.
How much?
Okay, yeah. And now do the dump now. Now just see if we can push on these and see if we can get them to come down. Normally what happens is you push on one of these and the nose gear goes up. So you're getting halfway there. Just
This one's all the way
wait
down.
on that one, Elliot. Just push on it. Yeah, see, I don't know if over time it would come down, and even if it would, whether it'd still be
on the side. How much side force? That's going to go all the way.
yeah, it's just that residual pressure. Look, and all you have to do is just, this is how much. Yeah, that's all you need. It just has to unlock that check valve that's in the pump. You know,
Just a little blip. Makes sense.
Yeah, and that actually hasn't come all the way down yet. That hasn't locked over center because it didn't have any gravity pushing it. Just press that button one more time. Yeah, now it's come out, see? So, you know, for whatever power and stuff that you've got, and then I couldn't think of a scenario where you're flying along and all of a sudden your battery has 0 volts. You know, you're going to have something.
You going to turn power back on? Gear is down, gear handle down.
You got the valve shut now?
Valve is shut.
Yeah.
We wrapped up the inspection on day 1, finding just some small things, some broken primary structure back from when the ailerons didn't have control surface stops. So the aileron had pulled the wingskin off the rib.
You can't film me doing this because this is where I had no idea what I'm doing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was all right. What do you got?
And then there were a few other jam points. There's a jam point in the rudder system that we found and some various minor glitches.
Weather, and it looks like tomorrow's not going to be as good.
Like the rudder would get hung up on the, as its full deflection.
Now let go. Yeah, so there's a little bit further that you can't get with the rudder pedals. That's what it takes to push it. So,
Well, you got it before. So just so we're clear here, there's 2 separate issues with the rudders. One was the lateral tube, fore-aft tube that we already talked about where they're running into each other. The second one is the right rudder. We found it stuck. So the rudders were designed to go to something like 40 degrees of deflection. They only get about 25 degrees of deflection. As a result, there's that 15 degrees extra deflection. And it turned out that if you pushed it all the way to the stop, just that right rudder, it would get stuck. All the way out. The first question was, why is it sticking? Is that a control jam? Is this something we need to worry about? The second question is, how did it get there? So if all we could do is move the pedals, and that's all, we've been doing a bunch of stuff in the cockpit, moving the pedals back and forth. How did we get the rudder far enough that it got stuck when the pedals will only take it to 25 and it needed to be at 40 something in order to get stuck? And that's what this discussion is right here.
So we're gonna do some engine runs, set the fine pitch setting on the prop so that we can make sure that we got the prop in the right position for the flight.
Again, the risk is we want to make sure that the prop is at just as coarse of a pitch setting as we can possibly get in order to maximize the power available to Justin in the event the propeller governor fails. He's trying not to over rev the engine, but also have enough thrust to stay in the air as he flies the pattern or flies whatever back to get back to the airport.
Yeah, so the mission of this is to run the engine at flat prop, so max prop like that when we turn it on. Actually, it should have already, yeah, it's already gone now, it's lit up, right? And that green comes on, right? So if you do this, now it's at max pitch. You can't, you know, the little motor in the governor, you can't hear it from here, but if you stand right next to it, you can hear it moving, you know? And then so you can just do click, click, and this, you know, you can see how much it takes before you get to flat pitch again, just doing that, all right? But emergency, if you were, you know, cruising along in cruise or whatever, and you got the max prop on there, and you all of a sudden want to go flat instead of sitting there and holding that,
Right.
that's how long it takes. Yeah, you just go like that, and it does it by itself.
Cool. We've checked static RPM, 3,700, right on the money.
Right on.
Okay, so we talked about the nose door release mechanism, which we're going to safety wire for the flight. You safety wired the shut-off valve in the left strake, so that's fixed. Rudder push rod, interference pin. So that's the rudder thing. So I made some sort of fix for that.
Is that a showstopper?
Yeah, I think so, just because of the risk of jamming there. But I think there's an easy fix. I don't think it's a showstopper for the week.
No.
Yeah, just want to make clear that. We talked about the brake restrictor valve. I don't think we need to change it before we go to high-speed taxi, but well, yeah. But I think we change it to max for high-speed taxi.
I'd still like to go on the recommendation of Behringer, because it's the same reason we go on the recommendation of MT with a prop. You know, they're saying that for a reason. You know.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to whether or not you want to save the brakes or save the airplane at the end of the runway. My recommendation is set to max, and I'm not gonna skid it if I don't need to. We have this rudder thing that we're gonna work on. You're gonna work on that shortly. And then the pitch setting on the prop, which we just checked, is good. Nailed it. Perfect. I'd call that freaking perfect. And then the only other thing that we haven't really talked about was there's a disc bond in the aileron cove. I think it was from before you put those stops in and before you clearanced it.
Crack in it.
Well, there's a crack, and then there's the rib to the skin is separated.
Really?
And that's the end of my list. So let's talk about that.
So this is our cracked structure rule. The rule is if there's any broken structure on the airplane, we ask that it be repaired. In this case, it was a rib that's way back on the trailing edge of the wing to a wingskin. Peter claims it's got a 1.5 to 2 inch long flange on it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But from our perspective, if the structure is broken, we need to A, figure out why it's broken, and B, repair it.
I see what you're saying, but I don't know how that is. There's any sort of thing that really needs to be addressed right away. There's no chance in hell that can keep separating all the way down.
So anyway, Peter addressed these new squawks, and we moved forward to low-speed taxi on day 2. So we showed up early in the morning. We're going to get a quick aerial survey of the airport and surrounding area to confirm my land-out assumptions.
Cherokee County Airport in Canton, Georgia has an elevation of 1,291 feet. The airport has a runway that's 5,000 feet long by 75 feet wide on a magnetic heading of 5 and 2-3. Runway is made up of asphalt. The plan had been to use runway 5. It's slightly more downhill, and there's better land-out options in that direction. It's about 6:30 in the morning here in Canton, Georgia. Get Justin some warm-up, take a look at the area.
Second one. That'll get you. All right, motherfucker.
So Justin talks about it a little bit, but just to be super clear, what are the concerns with the Cherokee Municipal Airport? First of all, looking at Google Earth, it's clear that there's a road that runs pretty much parallel to the runway, right? So you're like, oh, that's a great divert. You could take off, you could offset, and then land on the highway. So there's the runway with the arrow marking the direction he'd be taking off, and then there's the offsets. So you see that little arrow between, that would be your right turn and then left turn to land on the freeway. The thing that wasn't really visible on Google Earth, but once we got there we could see it, was number one, the highway is in the middle of a deep valley of trees, right? So it's a kind of a gnarly, they're not like roads in California where they're right at the same levels of terrain around them. These are very much like down in a river basin, number one. Number two, there are bridges that go across that freeway. Number three, in between the end of the runway and the freeway is significant terrain. So there's a big valley that goes right off the end of the runway, and then there's kind of a mountain, and the mountain has an antenna on it.
So here we are taking off out of Cherokee County. There's the big valley right off the end of the runway, covered in trees. If you look screen left, there's the antenna on the top of the hill. And as we bring the nose to the right, you can just now see the highway. This is in a twin Comanche climbing about 1,000 foot a minute.
It's not just get airborne and then make it to the freeway. It's get airborne and then get over the mountain, or get airborne and then turn inside of the mountain and then turn back to the freeway. It ends up being a lot more complicated once you get there. Another option that Justin talks about is what he's calling the downwind option. So because the road and the freeway are right next to each other, you could take off, do that 180-degree turn, and effectively land right underneath the downwind leg. That had been the plan. Once we got there, we could see it wasn't as great of an option. There's just a lot more going on than it looks like on Google Earth.
Alright, so tell me what we learned.
Well, we learned it's gonna be tight. Not very good options out there in an emergency situation, but
So as a rule at Wasabi, we don't like to go anywhere near the stall speed if there's any risk that the airplane isn't yet ready to fly. So on this day, we had determined that the airplane was not ready to fly, but there was more that could be learned during low speed taxi. So the goal for this taxi test was just to learn as much as we could in that low speed taxi environment. We'd done low speed taxi in the airplane before, but with the changes to the flight controls, and then in the interest of getting Justin tuned up on the airplane, where are the sight lines, where's the stick, how do I turn the radios on and off, what does the engine sound like, do I have all my right gear, do I fit in here with a parachute, what are the visibility lines, how does he open and close the door, all that stuff. That was the goal of that low speed taxi.
all right. Brief for the low speed taxi. So the mission for the day is to evaluate control authority to the airspeeds that we're going. With the priority being, or the highest risk being the pitch axis. So we're going to be testing for pitch forces in the speed buildup, but at the same time trying to figure out when at what speed we can lift the nose. So I don't know, probably the two biggest question marks are the pitch axis, and right behind it is the directional control. I'm ready to step if you guys are.
I'm ready to step.
All right, we finish gearing up.
Got speed across the board.
Good.
What are you done? Join taxi for that?
Clear.
RPM. Cherokee County traffic, 2 Tango Delta, line up and wait. Runway 5, low speed taxi. Cherokee traffic, 2 Tango Delta, beginning low speed taxi, runway 5, Cherokee. Looking for roll. G5 is dead. 55. Ground speed is 48, so 7 knots. Delta. Rudders appear effective, but they're effective very low
Traffic
speed.
Sky 32 Echo is crossing at midfield on the ground.
Braking action is good. Very gentle. Temperature's 200 on oil, 190 on coolant. Alright, final's clear. We're lining up. Brakes are set. Here comes power. We got 37, 36, 80. Brake release, airspeed's alive at 20. Nothing on the G5. Alright, rudder, there's 40, there's 50. Power to 24. Keeps you there. A little bit of
Certainly moving.
elevator authority. Just a little bit there at 50. Power's idle.
Quiet. All you're hearing down the end.
So I believe I saw, looking out the window, some elevator authority. There appears to be rudder authority, but because there's rudder authority even at very slow taxi, I'm not sure that's not some sort of connection.
Traffic, 73924.
212 on oil temp. Just under 200 on coolant temp.
So it's a great example of some of the stuff that could be missed in the event you show up and you're marching through and everything's working really great and you're flying 2 days after arriving to go look at a new airplane. So this is something we didn't catch until we looked at the footage. I have some background with diesel engines. I've seen this before with diesel engines, but this is something we didn't catch that day. So we did 7 low-speed taxi runs down the runway. Every one of them was a full power Bodie, essentially from idle to full throttle in the cockpit. On 2 of those 7 runs, the engine puffed significant black smoke. I got it from a couple different angles, but again, in the interest of trying to understand the overall risk of the program and understand what is known and what is not known and what are the risks that we don't yet know about or the things that we think that have gotten done but maybe haven't, this brings to question maybe some of the tune stuff, the ECU stuff that we were trying to get comfortable with that again lowers the confidence in sort of the whole setup.
Alright, we did pitch on the last run, so we'll do rudders on this run. Here comes power.
So this is the 3rd pass.
36, 50. Using rudders only. Nothing yet. Nothing yet. There's 50. Yeah, starting to get directional control. Got my feet way down low. Here at 50 indicator, which is 48 ground speed. Power's idle. Oil temp's over 225. Now. So just starting to get rudder control at about 45 is where it stops. At least being real effective.
You're gonna walk down?
Yeah.
You want me to set that in there?
Yeah, you can put it away.
Justin was just doing the first of the low-speed taxis and the engine quit on him. He's stuck down on the other end of the airport.
Trying to do the restart, but it's not restarting. Voltage drops to 8 during the starter engage, and it kind of just reboot there, so.
Justin's still in the airplane. Prop stopped. Smiley faces, that's a good sign. It's not on fire. Tell me a story, pretty boy.
He's doing the usual thing where the RPM comes down, and presumably because of the air conditioning, and I was bumping it up, but it didn't catch it.
Run the battery down with everything on.
Some sort of voltage problem. Justin was talking about not being able to control the idle, and then it quit, and then he can't get it to restart. I don't know if you could see it there, but he hit the starter, and it would turn over a blade or two and then stop. So I'm headed back to the hangar to get some jumper cables.
All right, give it a try.
Yep.
So it's never done that before?
I mean, I've told him before about the idle, because there's the idle mode on the engine. When you pull it all the way back, it goes into an idle mode, and in the idle mode, it takes care of whether if the AC is on, it adds another 150 RPM. Once you come out of that idle mode, which is around about 1150 RPM, right? It doesn't add that extra RPM for you. You've got to do it yourself, you know? So what ends up happening when you pull the power back,
I'm looking left on the ground, I'm looking left in the air, looking down the far traffic pattern.
I don't see anybody.
Behind me. Okay, here we go.
So yeah, once you come out of like he was idling and taxiing off the runway, there's a zone there when if you're pulling the throttle back, when the AC, this is only when the AC is on, but if you sort of hold it in there with about maybe 10% throttle or something like that, you're hovering around about 1200 RPM to 1100 RPM, and at that point the engine is, you know, got the more load on it from the AC, and it starts to sort of bog down, and unless you add more to it in time, it's
which is what he did, right?
Bog down more. He tried, it just didn't. It was too late, and it was bogging down. You got all the way down to like 400.
It sounded like he was adding more and more throttle, and it still wasn't working.
But that's the thing. Once you get down below about 800 RPM, it's not coming back. You're just drowning the engine with fuel, you know, or trying to. So the best thing to do is just pull it all the way back to idle. It'll switch to the idle mode, and then it'll maintain it itself. You don't have to do anything.
So after the engine anomaly, Justin made 4 more passes down the runway. On all those passes, the engine ran fine. The engine never quit again. You'll see him debrief it here in a second, some of the tricks he learned to try to keep the engine running. Again, as I mentioned before, that smoke that we talked about was only on passes 3 and 4. Passes 1 through 7 otherwise did not see the smoke during the spool up engine acceleration phase. When do we get to the hot part of the day?
Yeah, I wish we were in the hot part of the day. I mean, I heard it's supposed to get warm around here, but I mean, I haven't seen it yet. Lesson learned was anytime you come off idle, you don't want the AC on. It's gonna turn your engine on. Other than that, did the control axis evaluations, and I think it's in the directional axis, it's really hard to, because of the rudder pedal geometry, it's really hard to get your toes off the brakes entirely. So you see, like there's brake pad up here where you're supposed to be pushing, but even if your toe's here, you're still hitting brakes. So you end up driving with the front tip of your boot here down on this, like to make sure that you're off the brakes entirely. And then, so did 7 runs. The first one was kind of just a feel it out run, and then did aileron, you know, authority check, elevator authority check, directional authority check, and then did it again, not necessarily in that order, but so I got 2 runs on each axis, and for the most part it ended up overshot the first time to 45, so most runs were, you know, ended up between 40 and 50.
GPS speed?
Indicated. GPS delta was between 2 and 5.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
But it seemed to be variable.
So it was sometimes high, sometimes
well,
low.
and I will have to review the video, but my gut is that it's associated with power. On all axes I was seeing control
didn't really see any forces, so there's no force feedback from the surface between 0 and the 50 that we got to. Especially in the pitch axis, right? Because you're just so dominated by the spring. But definitely saw pitch, the nose bobs with pitch or with the elevator down to, I want to say like 45 is the slowest I saw it.
Power on, power off.
40 to 5, all medium power setting. Right, trying to maintain that airspeed. And the same thing in roll. So full back and forth in the roll deflection, and you kind of get a slight change in body axis. Well, so I saw that on the directional. So there was a little bit of directional with the ailerons, but I more saw body roll with the rudder than I did with cross axis with the rudder than I did cross axis with the ailerons. That was just the note that I saw.
All the accels were done at the same power setting, same prop setting?
Yeah, I left it full up the whole day.
So after the low-speed taxi, we went and had a telecom with Mark and reviewed some of Peter's footage from previous testing. Peter wanted to make sure that we were all in agreement about where he had been, what he'd done with the airplane, and then also we wanted to spend some time talking about that one flight where he had got the airplane just barely airborne. We had looked at the footage, we'd seen what he'd done with the stick, we'd seen him respond to getting the airplane airborne, and there's things about his body posture you might infer about what's going on with control forces, etc. But it's not until you sit down with the pilot that you can really understand what they were perceiving, and all these things are clues about what's going on with the longitudinal stability of the airplane, which is probably our number one or maybe our second behind sort of engine health issues as far as questions that we're tracking. The long telecom with Mark was a great chance to sort of, again, back to that question about weight and balance, where's the ballast, how much gas do we fly with, all that goes against static margin, and where's our balance, what do we need the CG to be to feel like we're going to have good handling qualities. Mark, being the designer of the airplane, he had spent the most time looking at handling qualities, looking at static margin, looking at how the airplane had changed, right? Justin mentioned that the surfaces had changed size since the initial design. So sitting down with Mark and Peter and talking through what are the assumptions that got us here, why do we think this is a safe ballast point to run at, why do we think this is a safe weight and balance to fly at, was sort of one of the last critical things as we're sort of clicking off trying to get ready to fly.
Prove that at 88 knots.
So what's going on in there?
Oh, it's hot out here. Peter's talking to Mark there, so we're cross-checking the data from Peter's, he raised the nose off the ground a little bit at different airspeeds. He did a little runway hop, got the mains off the ground, and the airspeeds that he's seeing from those flight test points don't quite line up with the data that Mark had in the spreadsheet that he used to design, kind of the basics of the airplane. So they're talking right now about how to tweak the numbers on the spreadsheet to incorporate the flight test data and make it more accurate. There's lots of ways to do it, and they both like to talk a lot. But we're getting close.
So I'm way down there, right?
I'm just checking weather. It's it says scattered, but it looks like it's overcast to me at 1,300 feet. So forecast says it's supposed to get better today. So I think we're stuck until it clears up overhead. It seemed like it was getting better in general before, but that's pretty dark over there. Yeah, so that's the weather. The other conversation is we did an evaluation of the airport, from a first flight perspective, looking at alternative options if you have a problem on the first flight, if you have a technical problem with the airplane, either handling qualities or mechanical, and there really aren't any options. So Peter and I had talked about this being a really bad airport to do a first flight out of, especially for this airplane, and my gut is I can't get comfortable with doing the flight out of this airport. I tried really hard. We had the conversation with him a bunch of times. I waited till we were airborne and we could see the terrain from the air. And it's just really, really tight. There's no options. The trees make it look like smooth hills, but then you look at the clearing and it's doing this. So when there's no way to land in a flat area if you decide that you're going to the trees. You're gonna face first into a mountain. So yeah, I just there's no way that I can get comfortable. You know, the whole thing about first flights is that, yeah, if everything goes perfectly, it's not going to be a problem. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about any little problem that happens mechanical. You're not making the power that you want to be, or you need to be making. You know, that's kind of the minimum mechanical failure. There's more drag on the airplane than we expected because the door gaps aren't sealed. Something stupid like that. It's all just cutting into that margin that you have from the nominal flight. My job as a test pilot is minimize the risk to the airplane. Even if Peter, the owner, has said several times that you know, he's fine if I punch out, you know, bail out of the airplane and let it land in the dump over there. I'm not okay with that. That's not why I'm here. Man. Yeah, so we're about to have the conversation later this morning about, number one, we need to punch out for schedule. Number two, like, we need to move the airplane via ground methods, which we've suggested before. Yeah. Well, the problem I've been having this morning, and we've been talking about it since we first trip out here, is the airport. And I've spent the last several trips out here trying to get comfortable with it, and especially after yesterday's flight, to look at the area, look at the things that we've talked about, the freeway, right, the trees, the hills, and then stayed up last night trying to figure it out, and I just can't get comfortable with it, like flying out of this airport with this first flight. Well, so we just talked to Peter about how I'm not comfortable flying out of this airport on this first flight, so it's not feeling good. Anyway, we're getting ready to launch. Gotta wait for the ceilings to lift. Gonna take the rental car back, cancel the hotel, all that shit, and then hopefully around 11 or so, ceilings will be up. It's currently 9, and we'll be able to get out of here. And then it looks like crappy weather the whole way across the country.
We just broke the hard news to Peter that Justin is uncomfortable test flying the Raptor out of this airport. In all honesty, he took it better than I expected. He does have a tendency to get a bit emotional in times like this, so we were pretty hesitant to try to figure out how to talk to him about it. I'm proud of Justin for biting the bullet and being direct with Peter about the problems with that airport. As Justin mentioned, we've tried to talk to him about that airport and the issues with that runway in the surrounding area for a long time, and he has trouble. He's very tunnel vision. It's not uncommon for someone in his position to have tunnel vision. He has tunnel vision about it. Probably the most concerning thing for me about that whole conversation was when he said, well, I'm just going to go do it. There's been too many examples, some very recently, where owner builder has thought they could open the envelope slow and been surprised how fast the envelope opens itself with unfavorable results. So unfortunately, like I said, so this is sort of the worst case scenario, in that we've sort of armed the gun and put it in the hands of the child, and we're telling him, please don't point it at your face.
So next steps coming out of this visit, Peter has agreed, it sounds like, to that moving the aircraft to an airport better suited for the flight test is the proper path. So freaking awesome, and we'll see where we go from here.